Well, Mike Flanagan, the director of stuff like Doctor Sleep and Midnight Mass, the co-creator of The Haunting of Hill House, at some point in his career, he's going to have a miss, isn't he? What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Movie Emporium's spoiler discussion of the Netflix original series, The Midnight Club. This is created, of course, by Mike Flanagan and Leah Fong, and is based off the series, of course, by Christopher Pike. So, just to let you know, this is a spoiler discussion. As I always say, I will be talking spoilers. I will be talking the whole plot of the story of this, season of course, The Midnight Club. But I'll also do a kind of non-spoiler review, just kind of give you my basic details before I get into the actual spoiler discussion. So, if you want to watch a little bit of that, you're more than welcome to. So based off the popular book from, of course, Christopher Pike, this story that is The Midnight Club is a 10-episode arc series where it basically follows this character named Ilonka, who is a terminally ill patient who has a thyroid cancer of some sort, and basically she online finds this character named Julia Jane, who in essence basically was cured. That she resided at this place called Briarcliff, which is a hospice, and she decides, Ilonka, to go to this place. And this is where we meet a bunch of terminally ill patients, including people like Amesh, and of course, Spencer, and Anya, and, Shiri, and Natsuki, and stuff like that. And they all have different type of diseases. Well, this place that Briarcliff has a lot more to it. It has a lot more, history to it. She starts discovering things, and it opens up a very interesting perspective on top of everything, where she learns that these terminally ill patients basically meet every night at midnight and tell stories, and those stories, which I won't spoil until I get to my spoiler discussion, kind of have play into the story itself, as well as the mystery of what's going on at Briarcliff. This is where we're introduced to Heather Langenkamp's character, Dr. Stanton, and some other characters, which I said I'll talk about in the spoiler. But it basically is this story, or these stories that are being told, that the characters tell themselves at this Midnight Club, which, is a really cool concept and idea if you think about it. So with that said, Christopher Pike is a pretty popular author at this point, especially in the teen space. I've read some of his books before, including The Eternal Enemy and stuff like that. He's an author that has a good grasp, like R.L. Stine, on just like what makes teens tick, how it works and stuff like that. But unfortunately, I've never read The Midnight Club. I really didn't know much about it. So going into this, I watched the trailer for this, and I wasn't really expecting much. It actually looked like a really stupid like Riverdale reboot or something like that, or something in the vein of like, the Babysitters Club and stuff like that. Even though I thought this looked really stupid, Mike Flanagan has a pretty perfect track record when it comes to the things he's made, doing like The Haunting of Hill House and Haunting of Bly Manor, Doctor Sleep, Ouija Origin of Evil, Midnight Mass, which I think is absolutely fantastic. I was going to give it the benefit of the doubt, and he's working with, of course, not only different writers and creators like Leah Fong, who he actually developed this with, but he's also, an individual that doesn't seem to do anything wrong. So I went into this, optimistic that it was, maybe it wasn't going to be as bad as I thought the trailer looked. And so for my non-spoiler review for this series, it's absolutely incredible. This is another fantastic thing from Mike Flanagan and the people he's worked with. This is a series that absolutely delivers on all fronts. It's horrifying when it needs to be horrifying. It's dramatic when it needs to be dramatic. It gets to your soul. It touches you in, ways that you didn't expect. Every person in this show, whether it's the main cast or the side characters or, the supporting cast, is absolutely delivering on all fronts. Every single major character in this episode or the series gets their, shining moment. The stories that they tell are absolutely riveting. And I'll talk about the stories in the spoiler discussion, but I found something out while I was watching this I actually completely forgot about, or didn't even recognize till I got closer to the end of the actual 10 episodes. But every moment of this series, though it does falter in the beginning just a little bit, where it's kind of tropey in a lot of respects, really feels authentic, and I was really surprised by that. I wasn't expecting to go into the story being absolutely just kind of torn to pieces, and just how emotional I would become watching this. It's absolutely riveting to watch. From the moment when Ilonka comes into the mix and she goes to Briarcliff, and then we're introduced to like Anya, who's this really, really just kind of, she calls herself like a bitchy character. She kind of is. She's kind of one of those that's very closed when it comes to like her wall and stuff like that in front of her. She's an individual that just has a lot of emotional baggage and stuff like that. that. And then you get to Spencer, who's dealing with some of the situations he's dealing with, and like, Sherry, and of course, Amesh, and dealing with people like Natsuki, who has one of the most riveting stories she tells in the actual series. It was insane how, once again, Mike Flanagan and his people just deliver on an absolute like delightful story, as well as delivering some interesting messages and concepts and ideas. And I was really taken aback. Like, this is probably one of the most surprising things I've seen in quite a while, and it shouldn't be surprising because it's coming from a pedigree of a person who just really has a handle on the material. And once again, Christopher Pike's stories were never like what I would call the most in depth, but they found a way to take that story of the Midnight Club and just completely wrap you into the cocoon that it presents itself in. And when like the twists and turns start happening, and when the reveals start happening, and everything you come to expect from a Mike Flanagan production, I gotta admit, I was not expecting to get what I got, and I was completely floored by it. And once again, Netflix should just keep this guy creating all the time, because he just delivers wonders for their company. And I would like to see Mike Flanagan go off and do something like with Dr. Sleep, but I think he's found his groove with this, with Netflix in the horror realm, and just everything he's presented. This is going to be another series where it's going to be talked about on the water cooler and stuff like that, or it's going to be talked about among people in the audience, because though it is very different than what they've been known to do, if people like Christopher Pike's stuff, they're definitely going to love this a lot, and they're going to love the kind of interesting take that he's taken with the Christopher Pike material. And once again, I don't remember Christopher Pike's stories very much, but I'm pretty sure they weren't like M-rated material. So this is doing what like Fear Street did, where it made it actually more adult and more mature, because it's very, very violent in this series. There's a lot of language, including the F word in this series, and it doesn't. I was kind of questioning whether it was something that needed to be needed into a series like this, because it is 10 episodes. But I don't think it deters from it. I think this is a story about honest characters that are in unfortunate situations that they might not live for another year because they are terminally ill patients, and the stuff they have to deal with. And I think it's very realistic. They would use this kind of language, or they would deal with this kind of situation in the stories they tell. And I just, when this comes out on Netflix, I definitely recommend it, especially if you like Mike Flanagan's stuff, or you love the other series he's worked on. Definitely check it out. But I also give credit, like I said, to the writers that have worked on this. They've worked on other Mike Flanagan stuff. They've worked on big productions and stuff like that. And the directors, some of them, this is like their first time directing, and you can definitely tell that they are under somebody who knows what they're doing. And it's a really wonderful thing that they presented with the Midnight Club. And I was really surprised. I was not expecting to love this. And it's a horror show, it really is, but there's much more deepness to it, and there's different levels of just of dramatic stuff that's going on in this, and it really has an emotional core to it that I wasn't expecting. I was expecting this to be a story about people telling horror stories, and just kind of, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, but it wasn't this, to be fairly honest. But I'm pretty happy that I got what I got. So with that said, that's gonna be my kind of non-spoiler take of this series. Highly recommended. Check it out. If you've seen it already, go on to we'll talk about the spoiler discussion. But if you haven't, definitely check it out first and then come back. So with that said, let's go ahead and head into spoilers. Okay, so spoiler discussion for the Midnight Club. It's really, I was worried that when I watched this series that I was going to have trouble explaining it, and it turned out to be a little bit easier to understand and kind of watch it, because to be fairly honest, I watched this whole entire series in one day, which I never do. That's how enthralled I was by what was going on, and I wanted to see what happens next. And that's the only good thing about kind of the binging situation to a series, is you get to see what happens next instead of waiting a week. But now that you've seen the series, I'm hoping you've seen it before you watch this review. Man, there's a second season coming. I'm really excited, but when you go into binging territory, oh man, it's like, oh, I've watched everything, now I gotta wait another year for another season. And I'm really hoping Netflix, if you're watching this, please do not like cancel this series like you've done a lot of other series, because you have a true winner on your hand when it comes to this series. It ends with, of course, Heather Langenkamp's, this is, we're spoilers now, with her Heather Langenkamp's Stanton character being part of Paragon, which is, of course, this kind of cult group that was, under the house and stuff like that, as we learn later on. And it just ends there. It's a perfect, cliffhanger ending. It actually, leads, hopefully to people going, oh my god, I can't wait for the second season. But as of right now, the Midnight Club hopefully will get another season when it comes to season 2, because if not, I'm gonna be really upset. I've been pretty upset with some of the things that Netflix has chosen to cancel, but I really think this is something that Mike Flanagan and Leah Fong and the writers and directors and the cast and crew that are still alive will continue on in season 2. I hope. That's what I hope. But like I said in my non-spoiler review, I expected this to be a straight horror series, be straight, just insane and just kind of creepy and jump scares, which there are way too many, unfortunately. There is a negative to that. And I expected it to go like Haunting of Hill House, or Haunting of Bly Manor, or to an extent, I guess, Midnight Mass, where the horror elements are very much present in the series. And there are a lot of horror elements in the series. There's a lot of jump scares, like I said. But I also was looking for ghosts all over the place. It's the problem with Mike Flanagan's stories now. There's always going to be something there. There is a couple cool moments where I'll talk about in a second. But, I expected there to be stuff in the shadows, which stuff appears in the shadows, but you see it's that kind of, pop up in the effect and stuff like that. The thing I really, really love about the series, and I'm not going to go point to point because that would be really dull, as I've learned, as I've gotten better trying to do these spoiler discussions. I love this series for the simple fact that the horror elements in this story, they have a purpose, they have a reason and logic, and it's not what you expect. The ghosts that they're seeing, the images that they're seeing, the shadows and the smoke creatures, and everything that they're seeing. They see an old couple running throughout this entire series. They're like, I'm hungry and I'm thirsty or whatever. Those characters, though they aren't fully developed, I guess you could say, have a true purpose, which I actually was pretty shocked by, because when you think about this series, it's a series about terminally ill kids or young people or, young adults and stuff like that. The thing that's always been presented, at least from, depending on your faith, it could be different, stuff like that. But, somebody who has that faith about kind of what you see before you die is the things that are coming for you to bring you on to the afterlife. And they're scary, they're dark, they're disturbing, at least for, what is being presented. So the idea of these characters that you don't really understand from the beginning, like the old couple, and like I said, the creatures that you see and stuff like that, in essence, you could look at them as, the preparing for death. Because what's cool is, it's not really cool that they're dying, but what's kind of cool about it is, as the story moves along, Ilonka starts seeing these the past of the characters, which I'm assuming they're gonna get more detail in the second season. And she meets another character named Shasta, which is actually played by the woman who was the main zealot in Midnight Mass. She, in essence, is seeing flashbacks, seeing this old woman and this old man. They're saying, I'm hungry. And then the other characters Anya and other characters like Amesh and stuff like that, are seeing them too, but they're not seeing them until they're getting closer to dying. Amesh doesn't die in this season, but Anya, as we learn, and they see these creatures, and they start to kind of figure out that these creatures or these things they shouldn't be really feared. They're kind of a way for the creatures to pull you into the afterlife or into the new whatever you go on to, whatever you believe. And that's a really interesting concept. That's something that I wasn't expecting. I expected boo, and there is a lot of jump scares, like I keep saying, and that is my one qualm with this series, is there's too many jump scares. I know Mike Flanagan is better than this. Him and his creators are better than this. I wish there wasn't so many jump scares. It's annoying. There is one moment where they actually make fun of the whole jump scare situation, which I'll talk about. But what's so kind of interesting is just how that plays out. Is the more and more they get used to the situation, the more and more they learn about the Paragon and they find the basement and stuff like that, and they find this kind of culture society. They start kind of understanding that the things around this house maybe not what they seem. And it like I said, it really plays prevalent when they try to, because like I said, I think it's Julia Janice Jane, or however you say her name. She was cured, but she disappeared, but she was cured and stuff like that. And what happens, she went underground, or as we learned, she went to somebody's house. And they try to do the same thing with Anya by doing this kind of ritual that they find this book for. That's when we get that episode with Anya and her kind of she ends up in this alternate reality world where we see the different stories being played out into a weird fiction and stuff like that. And like I said, it leads back to the whole kind of things they're seeing. It's not the Haunting of Hill House, where the characters, the ghosts that you see or don't see, and they're in there in the background, are just more of characters that are part of that world. And these characters characters, these ghosts and stuff like that, aren't, and are not part of the world, but they're not what you expect. And I thought that was a really cool, interesting thing, because Amesh talks to Natsuki at the end. He talks about, you know, the fears and stuff like that, but he also talks about like how he's seeing shadows in the background, and they know with the type of, you know, situation he has, because he has the thing on his chest, which is kind of a reader or whatever. It's kind of how he gets his injections and kind of the blood taken in and out and that type of thing. It becomes like he really is realizing that these things are more of just a way for them to move on, and they shouldn't be as scared of them. And I thought that was pretty brilliant. I thought that was great storytelling, and I just thought that was a potent way to do it. And that's not even like the most impressive thing about the story. I just thought that was kind of cool to start out talking about. And it doesn't mean there doesn't need to be more explanation with like the old people. I'm assuming, if I read it right, they are part of Stanton's family. They're the old parents. They're the, you know, people that built the house. But why are they there? Why are they hungry? Why are they thirsty? That type of thing. I hope that gets explained in season 2. But the main thrust of the story is Ilonka becomes friends with Anya, who is once again like that very angry person. Then she finds out about this midnight club, which is, they basically go down to the library and they tell, at midnight, they tell a story. They tell a horror story or sci-fi story or just a story in general. And at first they're like really creepy and disturbing and dark, and like the first story they talk about is like I think it's Spencer's character. He's walking through this, like, you know, this deserted street, and he sees people in that, you know, of course the houses and stuff like that. And of course one of them is Natsuki's character. And basically what ends up happening is they play on the trope of the jump scare, which I thought was pretty amazing, where it constantly seems like Spencer's character, because in the stories every single character in the show playing different universe characters. They're playing different, you know, forms. It allows the budget to be slimmed down, so they'll just like reuse an actor who's in the actual main story and use them in the story and plotting and stuff like that. But it basically, Natsuki's character is basically like every 5 seconds she's jump scaring, because she's like somebody who's very possessed. She's jump scaring Spencer's character in the middle of the street, just popping over here, front of you, back of you, on top of you. It's pretty funny. It's pretty, like, it's actually kind of scary and a little startling, but I thought it was kind of amazing. And that's the first story they kind of tell, and at first you're like, okay, sure, that's cool, it's a horror story. This is where it is a little clunky in the beginning, because I really wasn't understanding what the stories are pertaining, but it was a fun story. It was the ending of the story, I can't remember who was telling it, but it was the end of the story of the person who was telling it. And yeah, it was a cool little story, but it also makes fun of, you know, the whole jump scare situation. But as the stories move along, as, you know, the characters start developing relationships and form relationships, and, you know, Natsuki with Amesh, and of course, you know, Kevin, who is the one who has leukemia, and of course, you know, Ilonka, who are kind of forming a relationship there. I also love that Ilonka has a stepfather who really cares about her and doesn't want her to do this, but she wants to do it. And then of course, you know, Spencer's character also has a mother who can't deal with the fact that he has AIDS and he's gay, which is a really potent thing, which is really kind of prevalent even today. And also the kind of interesting thing is this takes place in the 90s, like 94, 97, around that era. So I love like the clothing ideas, and I love the music, and, you know, there's like Blind Melons playing and stuff like that. And I love the idea of like just the world, the fact that it's always been said, if you can set the horror back in the 80s and 90s, you don't have the use of cell phones. It's that kind of stuff. So I thought that was pretty clever in its own right. But as the stories move along and as you start watching them play out, what's really interesting is the stories are creepy. The stories are sci-fi and horror, and, you know, one's a story about, the one that Kevin tells is a story about, you know, a murderer who kills women in like the most brutal fashion way possible, who is basically in love with this girl who is very much the Ilonka character. And in the background, he constantly is being berated by all the victims he's killed, and he can't hear them, but they have some kind of weird, like, the noises that they're coming from their mouth is like affecting him. And we find out later on why that is. And then you have like this, you know, 1940s noir that has to deal with, like, you know, a young woman trying to explain the whole situation, like trying to figure out who the murderer is, and this, and it involves Spencer's character. And then you have, you know, Natsuki. I'm going to talk about Natsuki's story later on, Spencer's story later on. And then you have Ilonka talking about the Julia Jane character. I think it's Shuri. It's Shuri who's telling the story about the witch and stuff like that. And you're listening to these stories and they're really cool. They're different genres, they're different ideas. But what the stories end up doing, and I'll also talk about another aspect which I didn't realize, is they're talking about the fears, the perceived notions, the ideas, there's just crazy aspects of these kids' unfortunate feelings about their upcoming demise, their death, their terminally ill patients. Anya tells a story about, giving her soul to the devil so she can experience, because she was very much pushed into being a ballerina, or like something like similar to what Natalie Portman was in Black Swan, and it causes her to split into two people. One person's going to go off and do the awesome fun stuff, but she's going to, in essence, be kind of she's going to experience everything. She's going to experience what her doppelganger did, but she had to sell her soul to the devil. She basically finds that, basically ends up, causing problems where she feels like, what it's like to have sex for the first time, but then there's the hardcore drugs like heroin and cocaine, the drinking, and she ends up having to like cut herself in very violent ways to get her attention. And basically, like the other stories, like the one that, Shuri's talking about, like the one that Kevin's talking about, it's their fears, and their not necessarily desire, but their fears and their sadness, and just the way they look at the world, and the aspects of just how scared they are about the eventuality of death and how that comes to be. Yes, the stories are creative. Yes, the ideas are being presented, but you can see that most prevalent in Anya's story, and just how everything just becomes so kind of chaotic and just so out of control, and she feels like she lost everything, in the simple fact she lost her family. She feels like she sold her soul to the devil to experience life, and you can tell, especially in that story, that everything that she was, the doppelganger was experiencing, is how her kind of road left down to where she's at now, where she basically is dying of cancer. And it's the same thing with like the character that Kevin plays, the fact that he feels like he's being brutally put down because of this leukemia and stuff like that. And it's told amazingly well. The stories are told just impeccable in the way they're, every episode is a different story. I love that fact that Kevin, when he tells a story, he does to be continued. What I love about it, he wants to get to a point where, like, he's so worried when the story finishes that it's going to be the end of his life and stuff like that, so he just wants to keep continuing it. And I love that about it. I love that idea. I love that concept. And I love that fact that it's like what they feel in their mind and soul and body, and it just is presented out there in just such cool ways. The whole witch thing is about how this character just felt about her mother and stuff like that. And it's the same thing about what we'll talk about with Spencer's character and stuff like that, and the same thing with Nasuki's character. And when you can see it so prevalent when they're talking to their families or whoever's families are left, and just how those stories are impacted by what they experience in their life. And just, even though they're cool to watch and they're very violent and they're very scary and sometimes they're very just kind of awe-inspiring, I just love that about it. And like I said, the other thing I was going to talk about, I'll talk about in a second, but I had to talk about these other stories first. Well, one of my favorite stories before I get into Nasuki's and of course Spencer's story is Amesh's story. And why I say that is because Amesh tells a story of it's like more of a sci-fi slant or something like that, where he loves video game development, and he comes across this guy who wants him to play a video game to destroy the satellite. Cool. It's similar like war games a little bit. He wants him to destroy something. But what we kind of find out, he's very much attracted to this girl that works at like a video game store or something like that, who is Natsuki's character. And basically what we find out is Amesh's character from the future, playing Amesh, who's playing the older Amesh, is actually Rao Kohli, who is, of course, a staple of of Mike Flanagan's movies and stuff like that. He basically came back to the past to make sure Amesh destroys the satellite, because the satellite was basically stolen. It's going to use to destroy the world. If you've ever seen like Ender's Game, you kind of know where this is leading. And the woman that is married to Amesh in the future is, of course, the woman that he loves in the video game store. I thought that was fantastic. I love it. Like, he does a whole like video game slant, because, of course, Amesh is very much in the video game and stuff like that. It also is like his fears of like not having his love for the future. And like I said, he falls in love with, of course, Nasuki's character, and just that whole slant idea. Once again, like I said earlier, all these stories are playing into the mindsets of these characters, and the fears and desires and the ideas and everything that's being presented is just told in a very cool way. But they're not the emotional parts of this. Like, you don't get it till like very later on, when, like, for instance, Anya unfortunately dies. Like I said, we get a whole story where she is basically allowed to move on with her, to the next form of her life, depending on how you feel, like what you believe in. And that whole episode is just emotionally heartbreaking. You know what's going to happen. The whole incident where she's, very, very sick and they're trying to help her. It doesn't go very well. And like I said, the whole episode is about her. She works at a store called S-Mart. If you know what that means, you know what that means, of course. She works for S-Mart, not very happy. And of course, we see the characters from the different stories playing throughout this entire episode, where they're kind of, interspersed throughout the entire episode. And I just really love that. But yeah, Anya was surprising. I didn't think she was going to die in this season, or at least until the very end. And it was very emotional because she starts out like what you expect, like a very bitchy character. And her emotional arc is just really prevalent and is very effective in kind of how it plays out, how it affects Solanka's character, how it affects the whole entire core of the Midnight Club, and just how brutally just kind of sad and just really, it's just one of those things where you think about her character and how fleeting life is in general, and we all think this, we all at some point come to the realization that we're eventually not going to be here, and that's played and dispersed throughout the entire series, at least the first season. But the fact that she dies is just, it's so heartbreaking. I had tears in my eyes. It was a very rough episode. But I mean, outside of that, none of the other characters are dying. They're dying, but nobody really dies throughout the rest of the series. But then we get to Natsuki's character, and she's having struggles. She's not feeling very good. And if you ever seen, I want to say like The Hitchhiker or something of that nature, where it tells a story of a girl that runs away or tries to get home, and she comes into these obstacles and stuff like that. Well, that's what this story is. It's basically Road Ahead or something like that. I can't remember, The Wrong Road or whatever it's called. And basically what she tells is a story where she tries to escape her situation. Her father died, blah, blah, blah. She's in the story. Natsuki's telling the story. And what ends up happening is she picks up a couple hitchhikers, and one of them is, of course, Henry Thomas, who, of course, is very much a staple, once again, of Mike Flanagan. And these two kind of hippie characters, or, very 90s looking, vagabonds or whatever, are very strange. You think something's going to happen to this Natsuki, or whatever her name is, Sheila, or whatever she called herself. And basically they're driving down the road, and she passes a woman on the side of the road who's walking, and she looks over and it looks like Natsuki, and they come up to a gas station. The Henry Thomas character walks in, and then they travel down the road, and she gets hit by whatever. Like, there's something on the road that gets hit. There's something that starts smelling in the car. Like, the fog starts to get thicker and thicker and thicker. And what's really emotional about this segment is the characters in the car. One is explaining to Natsuki's character, Natsuki, the one in the story, that she should do whatever she feels like, whoever she wants to be, whatever she wants to do. She wants to get out of the car, get out of the car. And the Henry Thomas character is like, no, you want to stay in the car. I'll go take care of the gas station, blah, blah, blah. As well as the gas fuel tank is really interesting because it starts to kind of lower really quickly. But I don't want to move the story real quickly, but as the story moves along, things start getting weirder and weirder and weirder. They make a loop. They see the girl walking again. She looks much more demented. Looks like she's like aging. They come up to the gas station again. It continues for a couple of rounds, where once again, hit by something. The woman in the back's telling Natsuki not to worry, be who you want to be. Henry Thomas saying no, we should continue. The gas gauge is going down, and they finally come across the woman on the road again. And it's really demented looking, like a ghoul of some sort. Come up against the gas station, or the car actually comes almost and hits a young girl who ends up being the young Natsuki character. And basically what happens is she comes up to the gas station as the woman in the back, the one's been telling her to be who you want to be, and Natsuki get out of the car and walk towards the gas station, which they've already passed like 3 times now. The gas tank is empty. She opens up the garage, and the car, the same car that she was driving is in the garage. There's smoke in the room, or in the garage, and basically what ends up happening is what we learn about Natsuki's character, where she tried to kill herself. She tried to let the engine run in the garage, the whole carbon dioxide or monoxide or whatever poisoning. And she has to make a decision. And the people that Henry Thomas and the other woman are playing are your conscience, the good part of your conscience, the bad part of their conscience, like the devil and the angel type of thing. She basically has to make a decision. Does she keep traveling down the road till her life ends? the fuel gauge is basically her life expiring. And what's really cool is she decides to live, but not without consequences. She opens up the door. Basically, when her mom comes home, finds out that the girl had was dying of carbon monoxide poisoning, was bloated and stuff like that. She's taken to the hospital, and the reason she's at the Briarcliff is because she is dying of a poison, and it's not explained what poison is, but it has to do with the whole carbon monoxide. And I was really just blown away by that story, because it's a very impassionate speech. It tells everything you need to know, and it does it in a very interesting, kind of provocative way that you don't see coming. You think she's just telling another story, but she's so personal with it that there is something off and really interesting about it. And it's entertaining, it really is. And I just was so taken and so blown away by it. And I felt so emotional. I once again tears. You get a lot of tears watching this show if you really kind of get into it. But then we get to a story about the Spencer character that he tells, and this is when the light bulb clicked off on my head, because I was thinking when I was watching this, basically it's a story about how he meets this guy. He's gay. He meets another gay person. He has this VHS recorder tape, and he's recorded what he thinks is the Terminator. It's the early 90s, so Terminator is pretty fresh. Basically, when they turn on the VHS tape, he, in essence, recorded the news in some kind of football game. Now he explains why he's telling the story, that he knows nothing about football. That's why the teams are the way they are. But he's also having some weird kind of dreams where it has robots and stuff like that. It's really strange. But as the story plays along, basically what ends up happening is he's at a bar, he watches the game, and what they find out is the VHS player was actually predicting the future. So they're able to not only save a woman from a C unit falling, but we also find out that very much that Spencer, who was named Rel, came back from the future and was a robot trying to kill this character that he ends up falling in love with, who ends up we learning that there's this guy who comes back from the future, another future coming back from the future, who's the older version of that guy that Rel falls in love with, named Christopher. And basically what ends up happening is Rel was basically come back to the future to kill Christopher. He's a robot. He forgot all his memories, as you do. And we also find out that Christopher, the older Christopher, is of course a robot as well. And every time he touches the tape, it actually brings back memories of his original mission. And at the very end, Christopher wakes up because he's been smoked. He's going to be killed, but he's wakes up from all the smoke, inhalation, stuff like that. He watches the tape, and what really hit me about that was really kind of surprising is the story is not even about a VHS player or robot or anything like that. It's about accepting who you are, and the fact that he confronts his mom later on. There's this guy that works at the facility that is played by one of the main characters from Midnight Mass, who also is a staple of course, Flanagan's the troop and stuff like that. And he takes him to see his mom, who's very much a Christian or Catholic or whatever, and she's very much kicks her, disowns her son and stuff like that. Spencer goes and confronts his mom like that. And basically, going back to the story basically reads out that, in essence, Spencer is telling the story about these characters that in this terminally ill situation, this Briarcliff, all need to understand who they are, what they represent. The fact that, he confronted his mom about the situation, he needed to do that because if he didn't, he will never accept himself for who he is. And Christopher was somebody in his real life that gave him the AIDS and stuff like that, but he kind of realized that he loved the guy, and unfortunately the guy passed away. And it's all about accepting and loving who you are, because there's a whole idea where he goes to this activist group's house, and he kind of learns this whole scenario and stuff like that. And it was just really it was heartwarming, but it was also sad and very emotional, tears in the eyes again, because it was just it hits you in the gut with the storytelling. And I just thought it was absolutely beautiful. At this point in the story, we're getting to a point where there's not even a lot of horror elements anymore. Yeah, we learn about, Ilanka comes across this woman named Shasta, who of course is, somebody who's working on the outskirts of, Briarcliff. And then we also learn that she's actually Julia Jane or whatever her name is, and that she actually wants to go back down to the lower level of Paragon and stuff like that. And she ends up trying to poison Olanka's character, and Stanton's character comes at the last minute and saves her. And it's just I'm kind of wondering where they're going to go with that route. I hope they actually explain a little bit more in season 2. But there's just like this whole big misunderstanding, like what exactly is happening with Julia Jane, what is happening with Lanka. But in the end, it's, this whole story is more than supernatural. It's about, the simple things in life, the ideas in life, the fleeting times in life, the dramatic looks in life, everything about this world and this idea is just like experience every minute, just kind of hold every minute too close to you because you only have a certain amount of time in this place. And I was like, holy crap. I was like, that's amazing storytelling. Like, even the last episode, there is no supernatural elements. It's just, the ends of stories of the witch story and Kevin's story, and people trying to explain that, Kevin, who's alone at the end of that story, doesn't need to be alone. He has friends. It's about, the whole story's about friendship and stuff like that. And I was so shocked that this was more of a dramatic storytelling aspect than even a horror aspect. And yeah, like I said, there's suspense and stuff like that, but it was never even about that. It was about individuals put into such crappy situations, having to not only come to terms to it, but having to, find ways to get through the situation, find ways to deal with the situation. At the very end, characters have concluding arcs and resolutions. Like the boyfriend, Anya's character, finally gets a little bit of resolution to it. And, the whole idea of the little ballerina mannequin and that whole situation, how it's repaired. And they talked about whoever dies will give a sign of that they made it to the afterlife. And that's the whole statue situation. And, the fact that, Ilanka, was going to go back with her stepfather, decides to stay. And, it's just a lot of stuff in the story just really was like shocking and surprising. It was not something I was expecting. And the even more surprising thing that, a lot of people will catch from, if they know Christopher Pike very well, is he's written a lot of stories. And I was watching the one with Spencer, which is called The Eternal Enemy. And I was watching, and I'm like, this seems really familiar, because I remember a story about a young girl or a young boy, I can't remember exactly who it was, who VHS player, videotape player, and uses it to predict the future as well as win the lottery. But in the process of everything, it caught, if you know anything about horror and suspense and sci-fi stories, you mess with the future is going to come back and bite you in the ass. And that's what happened in that story. And then so I looked it up, and I was looking up, trying to figure out the story because I couldn't remember what the name of it was. And I found Christopher Pike's his bibliography, his what he's written. And I was like, holy crap. I looked at one story. I'm like, okay. I looked at another story. I'm like, oh my God. And then I realized every story that every kid tells in this story, in this show, is a Christopher Pike story. And then my mind was even more blown because I just realized that, Mike Flanagan, not only in his crew and Leah Fong, were interjecting Christopher Pike stories, but they were actually adjusting them to create a lot of dramatic material and a lot of interesting sci-fi supernatural material. It absolutely worked. Yes, they changed a lot of stuff, especially in The Eternal Enemy. This time, the character Rel is something completely different, but that blew my mind. I didn't even think about that. It took me to like episode 9 or 10 to really figure that out. And I'm telling a friend, I'm like, I can't believe they did that. I'm like, that is absolute genius. That's what Stephen King does in his stories, where he interjects like Father Callahan into the Dark Tower, or Doom McKee or something like that has stuff with the Dark Tower, or anything of that nature. You have all these characters like, anyways, you have all these characters that like interject with each other and intersect with each other. And the fact that Mike Flanagan and Leah Fong and the writers made the stories of Christopher Pike's material and interjected it into the Midnight Club is absolutely brilliant. Now, I haven't read the Midnight Club, so I don't know if that's actually what happens in the book, so you can tell me. But if not, then what Mike Flanagan, Leah Fong, and the creators have done here is absolutely genius. And the fact that they were able to adjust it just slightly and just kind of dramatically enough that they actually feel authentic to the story, and yet they're still kind of a tribute to Christopher Pike himself. That is absolutely amazing. I was shocked when I realized that, because I had read The Eternal Enemy like 25 years ago or whatever it is, and I was like, oh my God, I remember the story because I was like, I love that story. I remember that story vividly because it deals with time travel and it deals with the VHS player and just the kind of ramifications of that. And it's absolutely brilliant storytelling. It really is. So yeah, I mean, if you know this as well as I did, it is crazy It's really crazy they did it and did it successfully. So with that said, that's kind of where I'm going to end it. There is a lot of stuff going on that I didn't talk about, but it's just, I wanted to do the basics. I wanted to talk about the stories. I wanted to talk about like the character arcs in a little bit, and just kind of the basic material and kind of the spoilers and stuff like that. At the very end, once again, the Paragon, part of Stan and stuff like that, which I kind of predicted that Stan was part of Paragon and whatnot. And she's protecting it, and we'll learn about it in season 2. But with that said, that's where I'm going to kind of end it. Very, very good. Absolutely excellent series. I can't wait for season 2. Netflix, please do season 2. A lot of great storytelling elements, a lot of great dramatic material, a lot of great just character development. Every person, like I said, has a shining moment, and the stories they're telling really kind of, you know, expands their character and fluffs it up and just makes it more dimensional, and the characters and stuff like that. Like I said, if I had any problems with it, it's just the very beginning when it kind of feels like very disjointed. But once it gets to the point where you start learning that these stories are connected into the feelings and ideologies and kind of just how the characters play out and their kind of roles as, you know, people that have problems with their situation, the terminally ill situation. It's absolutely brilliant. It's probably up there in the upper echelons of what Mike Flanagan and company have done. And yeah, I absolutely recommend it. It's definitely worth watching. And you know, once again, there are stuff in here that may not, you know, float your boat, but overall, I think it's absolutely brilliant storytelling. So anyways, that'll be my spoiler discussion for the Midnight Club, the first season. Apparently I didn't expect the first season, but the first season for the Midnight Club. And with that said, in the comments below, what did you think over the overall the first season? What was your favorite story that they told in the first season? Like, what was your favorite, you know, which character told the best story? Like I said, I love Amesha's story, but I also like Shuri's story. I also like Alanka's story. I think this, you know, a lot of them are pretty great, but you know, it is well done. But let me know in the comments below. So you know, if you like these videos, awesome. Hit the subscribe button to join Movie Emporium. Hit that notification bell at the top to find what's coming next. If you like the videos, awesome. Hit that like button, and as always, we'll see you guys on the next video. Peace out.